Every day there is a forgetting, and every moment there is the possibility of remembering. Remembering who you truly are, awakening to your body, to the inner world and experience of being alive. Here is where you find the beauty, the joy. Here is where you free your soma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Free Your Soma, Stories of Somatic Awakening and How to Live from the Inside Out. I have a wonderful guest with me here today. I'm so excited for this talk. Her name is Kwonyin. She is an emotional alchemy guide, a channel of pearl consciousness, vocal alchemist, and a teacher of yin. She helps those going through a deep, soulful transition who may be in an unknown, uncertain, dark space. She offers gentle guidance in the realms of catharsis and the transmutation of our shadow energies. Welcome, Kwonyin.
Thank you, Amy. So honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk today about some of all what I just mentioned about transmuting our shadow, about working with our shadow, about coming out of dark spaces, right? Or how to work with them instead of fight against it and, withdraw from those dark spaces as many of us, do. And we're going to also talk about the collective trauma that we all went through, about 3-4 years ago during the pandemic, and how you're doing some very powerful work to help people process all of the grief and the anger and all the emotions that were really heavy in humanity during that time. So this is a really great conversation. I'm so excited to have you here. Could you introduce yourself a little bit to our audience?
Yeah, well, first off, I just want to presence, since it is Free Your Soma, the things that are happening in my somatic body at the moment. This always tends to happen when I'm kind of, the spotlight is on me to share of myself, where there is this kind of like constriction that happens. Yeah, so I'm just presencing what's happening in my body right now with this like place of fright and excitement and like, oh, which I think is a good kind of segue to how I got into this work with shadow and emotional alchemy, which is so much about, yeah, the repression of what is really truly felt from the inner realms. Yeah. And so, yeah, I got into this work through actually like really hitting a wall really hard again and again and again, um, in a certain period of my life where it was dawning on me like, oh, wow, I have no idea how to deal with my emotions. Um, I have no language to even describe what's happening to me because it was just like realizing that there's a whole realm of my existence that was just like felt non-existent because there was no way to translate my inner realm to the outer. And so at that time in my life, I was um, living in Berlin, going through my dark night of the soul. I was living there for a number of years in my like mid 20s to through my Saturn return, and just really, really confronted with a lot of my shadows, um, and going through really, um, yeah, a lot of things related to me repressing myself, not knowing how to assert myself. And
So you were living in Berlin.
I was living in Berlin. I had just moved there as a way to kind of explore myself as an artist, and um, and just it came to be that I didn't know how to do that, even though I went there to do that. I went there to have space to explore, like, who am I? Like, what is it that I really want to do? And I knew that it was something in the creative realm. Um, but just feeling so stifled. Like I was just in such a place of creative block. Like I have all this space and freedom to do what I want. And yet that freedom was so terrifying that I just like, yeah. So that started me on an inquiry of what's going on with me that I like literally feel like I can't do the thing that I really want to do. And what is it that I want to express? And so that was my kind of entry into, okay, there's like this curiosity with the creative process, and realizing, oh, like from where I'm coming from, like my whole upbringing was always someone telling me what to do. You know, if you think about it, like school, college, even like getting a job, I was working in architecture. That's what I studied, my undergraduate design. And I realized after I kind of left that realm to realizing it's not really resonant with my path anymore, it was like, oh, what is it that I want to do? And that was my kind of quarter life crisis arriving into Berlin. Like I have all this space to figure out what's me. And that was just the most terrifying space to live in. But it was such a blessed time because we need that time to unravel all the things that you're told you should do. So I was in this big, like, deep self inquiry process of unraveling the should from like what is truly innately from me.
Yeah, and so much of that is tied up with our emotional states because if you can, I mean, I have a 5-year-old, and when we're children, like unless, very early on you get, a certain level of suppression, like children kind of like are expressive naturally. They express their feelings. They let you know when they're sad or they're upset or but over time we get conditioned out of expressing how
Mhm.
we feel, and we actually get disconnected from how we feel because of what you just said, because of all of the
Mhm.
shoulds and the kind of authoritarian
Yeah,
control of the systems, whether it's the system of our family and our family culture, or whether it's school, or whether it's the culture at large saying this is how you should look to be successful, or this is how you should behave in order to be loved, right? Like we have all these kind of conditions around us that
conditionality.
create
Yeah.
a little prison that we
Mhm.
don't even realize we're living in. And it sounds like you became very confronted with that when you had all this space, like you said, to do whatever it was you wanted. And you felt that the thing that was in the way was yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is the most, well, in a way, I'm getting to the essence, right? Like, okay, so I really need to look at myself. Um, and and for me, I felt like that conditioning maybe started really started early on to stifle what I'm really feeling. Yeah. So that was, I didn't, it kind of started very early on where, I mean, also being a natural introvert, a child, and yeah, so that inner emotions place, that was really also in my culture growing up, Korean American. Maybe there's like an extra layer of no, that is not okay for you to express that. And also
Yes,
being
especially
very
unpleasant
sensitive.
feelings.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
And so as especially as an empathic or like, sensitive child, very early on, you're tuning into what's not okay, what's okay, and let's just shut and silence the things that are unacceptable to mom and dad. Yeah. So then here I am in my adulthood having no idea, like my emotional compass is so off, like not knowing how to read my emotions, you know, and
You're
not
reading
knowing,
everybody else's, right? But
yeah,
you're not reading your own.
yeah, knowing everyone else's, but right, not knowing my own and having no idea like why I was even having a panic attack. because I'm so off of being attuned to myself, that I'm having panic attacks and all this anxiety and not having a clue like what's going on with myself. And then again, and then the really difficult thing is judging yourself so hardcore about it.
Like
Yeah.
that you should, once again, that you should know how you feel and you should
Yeah.
know how to, stop this from happening, or you should be able to control how you feel, all
Yeah.
that
You should be
content.
able to control better how you feel. I think that was, yeah, that was the gist of, yeah, that prison mentality. So that took me, but if, that took me on a whole journey, deep dive into trying to understand myself. Yeah. And, um, and through that, yeah, I just became kind of obsessed with self-help and shadow work and inner child healing. And once I started getting it, oh, and also around that time was when I was having insane body dysmorphia stuff with my skin. And of course, when, I started to make the connection between repressed emotions and my physical health and, and, and all the stuff that was, yeah, happening with my skin. That was a big trigger for me with acne, and that's a whole nother shadow realm of, our ideas of beauty and lovability with physical appearance. And yeah, my tower, all the tower of that feeling like, oh, I like my attachment to the things that I had to, the conditionality, right? Like growing up in this culture and being female, and you're supposed to present yourself a certain way and all about the surface. Again, it's like the dismantling of every attachment to the surface thing that prioritizes surface over what's happening inside of you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we use this kind of word like objectification. And I think that it gets overused. We don't really know what it means, but it means to see yourself or see others as an object,
Mhm.
rather than a living, feeling entity that is like having an embodied experience that is ever changing and evolving. What you said a moment ago about seeing that connection between the things that were happening in your body, like literally on your skin or in your stomach, right? Or really
Yeah.
feeling these physical
Hmm.
um, expressions
Hmm.
of the repressed emotions that were not getting processed and moved out. I think that that's becoming something people are understanding more than they were, like maybe when this was happening with you, like 8 to 10 years ago. I feel like people weren't as aware of that. Some
Yeah.
people have been always, but I
Yeah.
feel like that's coming more into our public consciousness of like, oh, it's our nervous system. Of course, what's happening emotionally is going to affect the rest of our body.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that I started realizing that's the root place we need to look at with the emotions. And this, do we have safety to feel this? Do we have safety to let these emotions be honored and held space for? And, you know, my upbringing was no. And so, and into my life, into my adulthood, because I was ignorant of this, I was also creating an unsafe environment for myself by pushing my own self away with these judgments about, oh, I need to get better about controlling myself with this, which created literal hell in my body.
Right. Well, and what I want to ask here, which is kind of, I think, a little spicy of a question, because I'm sure it's what some people are thinking when they hear you speak like this. Well,
Yeah.
what happens when you let go? Because that is a scary for a lot of people in the beginning.
Yeah.
If they think that they have to control their feelings, what
Mhm.
happened when you just let go and
Yeah.
felt your feelings? Like, what was that
Yeah.
like?
Oh, and so, that's a whole journey in itself, right? Because it's not just about, okay, I will decide to let go now, as if it's a button you can press and like, okay, all of it let go. No.
Right.
But I do believe that, I mean, you have to work in layers, and with the amount of safety our consciousness, psyche, body can feel to let go in increments. Like, okay, this feels So with me, it started with really owning my anger was like the first point of owning myself. With like, oh, this interaction that's happening with me in this relationship, like acknowledging this does not feel good. I and just getting to the place of I am disturbed by this. I give myself permission to be not okay with this. It's okay to not be okay about this. And that was a huge first initial milestone. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. And that kind of owning of that first layer of anger, of rage, was kind of like the beginning that just kind of catalyzed the rest. Okay, so now if I can, now my anger feels a bit more safe with me. Okay, now, and then the next is like, okay, so what's underneath this anger more? And the more I started giving myself permission to like own these feeling states and explore like, okay, what is it that I'm making it mean about what happened about me that's making me angry, and just more like self inquiry and more learning about, oh, okay, like there are these patterns that I hold about myself. And with this exploration, I just, each time it's like I found like diving in to find the pearl underneath of like the irritant that's causing this like pain, this agony inside of me, like with my presence and with my allowingness to really see what it is and feel what it is, that this is creating the pearl, and it's creating this iridescent like wisdom for myself to know like this is my truth.
Right. Something very valuable.
Yeah. Like without this, you're, yeah, like it just can't be, you know? I mean, the alternative is, again, that realm of terror and hell, of like not having a self. And so this was all like this process of, okay, coming to know who I am through these moments of, or like encounters of distress, trigger, something angering, and to really like own that as like, this is part of, this is all like sacred information about myself,
Yes.
me,
And it's,
myself.
yeah, I've worked with this, shadow work stuff a little bit, not as, I mean, you're very knowledgeable about this on an experiential level. Like I felt that when we met each other and when you started talking about it, and just in your presence, you carry so much grace about the intensity that this can be in a person's experience, like the level of intensity that one can feel in these moments of darkness, right? In these moments that we usually want to turn away from or try
Yeah.
to negotiate with or control. And, it's fascinating because even, there's a benefit to like naming the feeling, to being like, I am angry. This is anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, like it's never just anger. Like
Yeah.
anger is a catalyzing energy. Anger is very similar to passion. It's like it's
Mm-hmm.
right there, like, just step over the line from anger and we're passionate. We want to make something different than it is. We want to change something.
Yeah.
Just like I've been exploring that sadness in its own way, sadness is comforting in its own like weird, twisted little way. It's like kind of
So true.
cozy.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Because also when you name it, like, oh, I'm sad, as opposed to not acknowledging it, and you just kind of let it in cloud of unacknowledged, something. But when you're naming it, oh, I'm sad, then you're like, okay, well, what can I do to help myself here? What can I do to comfort myself? And then it can be this, yeah, sweet, cozy thing.
Right, where we take care of ourselves rather than just
Yeah.
the feeling is too much and I don't want to be with that feeling because it's going to be too much. And I think that, you know, it becomes too much when we pull away from it. But when we actually step into it, it's very different. Can you talk a little bit about that process of
My
stepping into the
goodness.
feeling rather than avoiding it?
Oh, wow. Yeah. This is resistance, right? Because we think in the moment, okay, this feels too much. So I'm going to avoid it. And in the moment, it feels like relief because it feels too scary or too intense to address it directly. But that's the thing. In the moment, it's like the short term relief for an accumulation in the long term, which is going to actually give you, again, like the opposite of relief. It's just, yeah, like that, like it is basically resistance that's creating so much inner turmoil. Yeah.
Accumulation is a perfect word for it because that's what does happen
Yeah.
literally in our bodies when we hold on to
Mhm.
the things that have happened and we don't process them, we don't step into them and own them and let them
Yeah.
move through us, as you're describing, they get stuck in
Yeah.
our bodies and they end up, causing tension, stress, and pain. They, on a physical level, but also they cause like this feeling of being trapped, this feeling of being in your own way in
Mhm.
life. I think that we really are meant to move through and with these
Mhm.
different parts of our
Yeah.
human experience. And so,
Mhm.
for me in the last couple of years, just, you know, being able to accept that I'm human and that it's kind of messy and
Mhm.
disturbing, and
Yeah.
there's going to be messy and disturbing times, if I can just like accept that premise,
Yeah.
rather than be really uncomfortable and afraid of it, it's like
Mhm.
those dark experiences don't have to last as long. It's
Yeah.
only when I'm fighting it and resisting it and not wanting to go there that
Yeah.
they sort of just be drawn out forever and ever. And as you said,
Mhm.
like allow for an accumulation that's going to
Mhm.
cause some kind of issue down the line.
Yeah. And I think that's that moment or that realm of, oh, I'm scared. This is too much. I think that's the space I feel that we need to put in so much compassion there and gentleness, like in that very, it's that liminal, like indecision place where we're scared, like at the precipice. And I mean, this is where we tend to withdraw and get really isolated there because there's so much also internalized shame about not knowing or not feeling like you're capable of confronting it. And those are things that are also coming from really earlier parts of ourselves, the inner child that didn't have or is needing that supportive presence to help through that challenging moment. A lot of us are carrying memories of that support not being there. It's that void place where no, there was no one ever there for me. I was always alone there. And so that's that deep loneliness trigger that comes up with no, I can't do this alone. And it's true. Like we're not meant to actually like know how to regulate ourselves alone. We need the presence of other people with regulated nervous systems to help us hold that space as we go through it.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
That
and we've never had that modeled for us. Of course, you don't know how to do it for yourself, and then we self blame, and it's so sad. And we need to know how to see like, oh, this is just me about needing support here when
for
it's scary.
sure. And I feel like, as you mentioned before, like some some cultures in the world are going to be more adapted to that than others based
Mhm.
on like their cultural history.
Mhm.
Like there was, I don't know if you've heard of this research, but there was all this research in like the 80s and 90s done on these Romanian orphans
Mm.
who were not touched. They were physically not
Oh God.
touched as babies. And so many of them grew up with developmental and sensory challenges
Oh
and
God.
like sociopathy and things like this because they didn't have that regulation of their nervous system. They didn't have that physical touch and physical love that lets them know like who they are and where they are and how to be, like how to actually be a person and process life. So much of that is learned through our early experiences, and then if they were raised in an orphanage, they weren't getting that attention. But, and also you could probably look at like the history of Romania and like talk about like culturally why they had an orphanage that, was like that. And I know that at different times that happened in parts of Korea, where there was a culture that didn't acknowledge the necessity of that co-regulation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We could look at different parts of the world or different cultures, and I think that there's an ebb and flow to this. I mean, for example, in Western culture, it's incredibly common for parents to have their baby sleeping in another room with like a wall or maybe multiple walls between them.
Yeah.
Versus places in like other parts of the world, like that would never happen. The baby sleeps like right next to the mama, like touching her the whole 8 hours or whatever that the baby and the mama are sleeping. So I think like there's a lot of different ways that humanity has done this over time. And right now, like at this stage with the, internet and the way that like, who knows who's going to listen to this interview. It could be someone in a completely different country listening to you talk about this stuff and, having their mind like open to these realities that like, that wasn't part of their culture, that they didn't get that co-regulation.
Oh, it's so, that just like gives me so much, shivers just like thinking about all the babies who are not being held. Yeah.
Or if they were born during a wartime or they were an infant during a wartime, there were things that were of higher necessity just that they stay alive than they get, and then they're getting the co-regulation of their parent in a state of fight or flight, not in a state of calm.
And that's the thing on the subject of like survival and what we kind of, I know the mentality my parents are coming from with in terms of like hierarchy of needs was definitely their priority was like very much in the physical, like, oh, having like a house, a home and making sure we always had food, of course, and those kinds of things. So that was what they thought as, okay, this is, we're providing for you. But it was not in their radar at all about emotional connection. But emotional connection, emotional closeness. And that's something I think that is a big blind spot for Korean culture in general. And actually many other, like most other cultures too, we're just kind of all in the dark ages about that. And it's changing more now, but yeah, in our generation, but yeah, in terms of like emotional closeness and connection being, this is the foundation for all the other needs, actually. If we don't have that being seen, being held, closeness, and being acknowledged in what we're feeling, like we're so, like, I feel like this is why we're in this like war ravaged war world that we're in, because of these like lack of emotional needs, this not knowing the importance of that, to like know how to repair things
and holding on to generational anger and holding on to generational emotions that are remaining below the surface, that are not being owned and acknowledged. They're just being perpetuated as these realities when in fact they're felt living experiences in a person's body that can be changed, that can be altered. Yeah,
because at the core, I believe we're all, with every emotion at the core of it, it's all love. Like there's anger, there's despair, like all the range of emotions that exist, that we all have access to feeling. But if any of those, if we don't go through the full cycle of feeling them, like the full completion cycle is always to return back to a sense of love and connection, of knowing like, okay, I can feel this and I can be received in this, and I understand that I am connected and a part of everything and everyone else. And so, but if we don't actually have the support and space and safety to like really go through to feel all of it down to its root core, back to love, then yeah, we're just staying stuck in.
Right, we're staying stuck in anger and resentment and hatred and rage because we're not following the emotion all the way, like you said, to its essence.
Yeah, back to our core essence.
Yeah. I mean, I'm almost thinking of it as like it's a cycle, it's a natural cycle of existence because everything in nature is cyclical. And
Hmm.
we're supposed to kind of come back around to the completion of love, but we're not doing that. We're
No.
staying over here, and then other people are staying like on the opposite side of that space. And we're both not returned to that state of love, but we think that we're against each other when really we're just on this cycle together, but
Yeah.
neither of us have completed the cycle and
Hmm.
come back to what really, what's the real reason why we want to fight over land or why we want to fight over the death of our loved ones is because we want to be alive, because the human body wants to continue to breathe and exist.
Yeah.
And that's because of love.
Hmm.
So I'm
Yeah.
totally with you on this. This is amazing. And like I'm thinking about, right now we're in a really challenging cycle
Hmm.
as humanity. And in some ways, I feel like we just came out of like a cycle that, with the pandemic that was also really heavy. And then
Yeah.
there was like this little space, and now we're headed into like another cycle. And I feel like, some of what you've been talking about on your content is that people haven't really processed the last thing. And I mean, you can think about that in your life, like how quickly we like move on to the next relationship,
Hmm.
we move on to the next, situation in life without actually processing like what happened before and how it's impacting us. Can you say a little bit about that?
Right. So I just literally, yes, or no, 2 days ago, we just completed my co-facilitator friend and I, Ari, Simon, and I just completed our pandemic grief school processing group. And it was, yeah, really beautiful 6 weeks we spent together with the group. All of us coming from different angles of the pandemic. But I think a unifying theme was that like the grief of the pandemic was about relationship disruption. The ways that it disrupted our connections with our friends, our family, our differing beliefs, um, values, and how, yeah, like those ruptures that went on unhealed and just and kind of sitting with, oh my God, it's still, I'm not over it. And it's kind of a huge initiation for me, for actually Ari and I to just put that on the table, like with like, we're not done. The pandemic is not done. Psychologically, I mean, on many levels, it's not done, but like psychologically, we have not dealt with the ways that it's so deeply psychologically impacted us. And kind of going on like a wait a minute, no, life can't just go on as if we need to address what's been happening to all of us, because certainly so many of our lives have completely changed. People made really big drastic life shifts during that time, and there's been a lot of, yeah, relationships that were kind of permanently altered from that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking back on that time and just how many people I knew who, were like really either anti-mask or pro-mask, and they could be like
Yeah.
in the same family group, and it would be
Yeah.
causing these literal like rifts in relationship.
Yeah.
Someone would decide that they were just, going to go ahead and have their birthday party or go ahead and have Christmas, and some other member of their family or culture, would be totally livid
Yeah,
and
they're like,
upset.
I can't believe you did that. Just like,
Yeah,
yeah,
and not to say that their feelings weren't valid either. They were living under a fear of like, maybe their mother or their brother or their disabled child or
yeah,
whatever it was, like being impacted permanently
mhm,
by, what they considered to be others' frivolous choices.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like it was really charged up. And now we're just like going back to like, oh, it's all good now.
yeah.
Christmas is on. We're not talking. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Right. And I was giving an analogy of what it feels like in the current world. I mean, when we were first starting to put this grief school out there, was it still kind of feels like you're meeting all of your family for Thanksgiving dinner, and everyone has a secret grudge against each other still, maybe a little bit, but no one's talking about it. It's just awkward dinner, just quiet. because no one's really talking about the pink elephant in the room. Like that's what it feels like with the pandemic. It just kind of, everyone's tired of it, and everyone, we're just all fatigued from all of the drama. Yeah. So that was a really big opening statement with all of us getting together, was that, why does it feel like it's hard to even bring up grief at all? And it's just like this fear of being a Debbie Downer, like, oh, I don't want to be that person, you know, bringing down the vibe, talking about this heavy thing again. Like, don't we just want to be over it? We just want to be
Right.
done.
And I think you're bringing up something really important too, is that, if we as a culture are not comfortable with moving through
Mhm.
our emotions to their completion, it's
Yeah.
going to be uncomfortable for some people when you actually feel your feelings and you do that like in their presence, when you actually express your anger or express your sadness.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people out there that are just going to be like, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. Like that makes me uncomfortable. I don't
Hmm.
want to experience, your anger, like, because I'm
Hmm.
not comfortable experiencing mine, and that was honestly, I'm speaking for myself. Like that was me for a long time. I was very uncomfortable with like other people's intense expression of feeling because I wasn't really allowing myself to go there. You know what I mean? So I think like in regards to the pandemic, like there's a lot of, what did we call it at this time? There was this word for it, like virtue signaling
Oh
of
yeah.
like, this is how you should be behaving right now, given these conditions.
Yeah.
This is what you should be showing to the world of like how it's okay to behave based on these like circumstances,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah. And no, like we just need to throw all the shoulds out the window. Because yeah, like we're all, I would say we've all been collectively pretty fucked up, from everything. And things are continuously going on with shadow, um, shadows of the human psyche, exploding out in all these
Yeah.
ways. So yeah, another big theme of the grief school was about how just the demonization of the other. Like that was, I think, a big theme of the pandemic. Like, oh, what? You're doing something that you know, that makes me unsafe. So you are canceled. Or like, I don't know, just like this big thing of, yeah, like if there's anyone who I see as a threat, like, yeah, kind of demonization. And I think that's a big shadow, just in general to be aware of within the self. And like how do we work with the opposites, happening, like opposite beliefs, opposite, um yeah, someone who's just holding a different opinion. Like how do we deal with that? And I think the pandemic was a good example of like, oh, how we don't know how to handle that.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that there was a lot going on during the pandemic with like experiencing or relearning about boundaries, because we had all that like, social distancing, like physical boundaries. You weren't supposed to be like hugging people or like touching people. And, you know, then on top of that, there was this boundary of like, I mean, I remember at different times, like, you know, wanting to see someone that I would normally see on a regular basis and just literally being even afraid to ask them if they
Yeah.
wanted
Like,
to meet up because I was afraid I was going to offend them,
yeah.
or upset them by merely suggesting that we meet in like a public place, like outside wearing masks, like I didn't know like if they were, how they felt about all that. And so there was like a boundary that I like created on my end of like, oh, I won't bother anybody. I don't want to upset anybody. Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so I feel like that's also all this watchfulness and not knowing and being super careful and really mindful. But like, where did all of that energy go? And that's all, like, we were talking about accumulation, right? This accumulation of what is okay to do with, like, what is the okay way to connect, which is yeah, and I think we're just still dealing with that, with like what's the appropriate thing now. And when the pandemic created so much of this, yeah, separation, distancing, and like isolation and loneliness,
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
just physical loneliness, but it's like also deep kind of psychological, social loneliness with, yeah, all the different ways that people were afraid of offending someone if you shared a different belief. And like this internal fragmentation, it just accentuated the fragmentation of like, I don't want to do anything to offend and like become possibly a social outcast now and
Yeah,
carry deep primal fear. No
absolutely.
matter which side you were on, everyone was afraid of like, becoming an outcast. Like, oh,
Right. And I mean, I have, I guess you could say, like, people that are close to me on both sides of the fence, where like there would be certain circles where I actually might be a little bit afraid of walking and wearing a mask because they'd be like, "Why are you wearing a mask? Da 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 da. Are you, like you believe in this pandemic?" And then I might be in a different social circle where if I came in not wearing a mask, that was the totally wrong thing to do.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Uh-huh.
and I think a lot of people had that experience. So this experience of just trying to figure out like how to behave. And I think it goes back to that childhood experience that you were talking about early on of being kind of disoriented and not knowing like how should I be behaving right now? Like what's the right
Mhm.
way to do this?
Yeah.
That like kind of fear and disorientation, I'm sure that it's left over in a lot of us. I'm sure that it's like down there, like not really worked out because it wasn't like it started during the pandemic. It was just reinforced during that time, you
Mhm.
know? But the disorientation goes way back to like all the shoulds and the rules that we experienced as children, of like, I mean, it's hard because like I even do it with my son without realizing it. Like, I don't know if you've heard a small child shriek recently, but it is a very ear splitting nervous system tightening experience.
Oh my God.
And when your small child is doing that like right in your face because they
Yeah.
want a cookie or something,
Uh,
there is a part of your human body that's just like, no, like make it stop, like stop making noise. You know what I mean? At the same time, like, how can I do that in a way that's not going to suppress him from
mhm.
actually expressing himself? You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
But I
Uh-huh.
think that there's such a deep conditioning as we talked about before of like how do we how do we express ourselves
Right.
and also get our needs met in other ways from
Yeah.
our culture, from the people in our lives, right?
Mhm. Totally. Yeah. Because also in the moment that your son's shrieking, it's also like you're having a reaction, you know? So, oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah. There's so much, I feel like, uh, of like space we need to be able to have spaciousness for ourselves, to have like our own shrieks and be able to hold space for someone else's shrieks, and like, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's a lot too, just like the the way that it can shift
Mhm.
even within a few moments. And I'm sure you've seen this, or experienced this where it goes from a shriek to like crying
Mhm.
or nothing for a moment, like everything just vanishes for a moment and then a new emotion arises. Like we
Mhm.
if we actually are present to these things, they're not still like we have feel like we experience them when we're stuck. They're actually like moving and changing and
Mhm.
shifting a little bit, right? From moment
Mhm.
to moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And that it keeps changing and shifting when we are in that present allowingness of it. Yeah, like, okay, this is what it is now. Hmm. Yeah. I always go back to like in my, was it, yeah, second ayahuasca experience, where I feel like I really learned a lot about emotions and resistance in that journey. And yeah, just the number one download from that is do not resist. Like whatever is coming through, whatever is arising, the lesson was like receive it, honor it, even if it's the most terrifying, horrific thing. Yeah, and I always try to keep that in mind when, yeah, there's a big wave coming. I can feel it within myself. It's like,
It
okay.
is like I'm imagining like kind of this, well, I'm not imagining it. I'm sort of experiencing it in this moment a little bit, but like these feelings that can come over us. Like, what is it about feeling that is so scary
Mhm.
for some people? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think it is about an emotional experience that we find so daunting?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not something that's going to last. Like, we don't stay in
Yeah.
a full state of anger for like even hours usually. You know what I mean? It's something that's short lived, but we're so afraid to like feel it fully. What is that fear about? What is that resistance about?
Well, I think there's like shame and guilt associated with it. That's what's making it hard. That's the resistance, right? That's the little blocker inside that says, no, I can't go there. Um, because and then that's where the exploration of like, what am I making it this mean when this is present in my body, when this is present in my mind? And what you'd usually find is, oh, there's a correlation that was made in yourself about when I feel this, mom will disapprove of me, or this will get me into trouble somehow. Um, this is something really like something really unattractive, really something ugly, unwanted. It's like a undesirable thing, and when this undesirable thing, when you show that, then you will be, and then it usually comes down to at the core, it's like I will be rejected.
And that's a huge deal when you're a child because you need people to take care of you. I mean, we need that anyway. We need
Yeah.
community. We need that attendance, but especially as a child, that's like life or death, you
Yeah,
know?
it's life or death. That's why it feels like a life or death situation internally, even though on the surface it may seem like, oh, this is not a life or death thing, like that you get angry with someone about this. But on a deep emotional level, it could feel like, oh my God, no, I will, if I show this, I will die. I will be excommunicated, rejected, and die.
Right. My life as I know it will end. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, kind of speaking this out and like spelling it out a little bit here, if you combine that with the literal like life and death stress of a pandemic, of
Yeah.
this sudden illness that's killing people off, and there's this mystery about like how, horrific it really is. Like some people are experiencing it very directly. Other people are like, I don't even know anybody who has it yet. There was just this whole charge around this of it literally feeling like a life or death scenario for many people. On top of that, they had all this social stuff that was going on that
Mm-hmm.
reinforced that like fear pattern even more deeply.
Yeah.
In this process, I'm sure there was a lot of fear and anger that came up.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the things that people felt like once they had kind of released or integrated the upsets that they had gone through? What were some of the results for people?
I would say like grieving together about the things that had happened, like everyone acknowledging, oh, it's so important to grieve as a community and just to come together to, no matter what, painful thing happened, that somehow it became bearable and when it was shared with each other.
Wow. Yeah, so that people could be witnessed in
Mhm.
their
People to be
in their
witnessed.
experience. Yeah.
Hmm. And that, like that the most kind of painful thing about all of it, it all came down to, yeah, relationship rupture and the isolation and loneliness that created. And so I think just coming together as a community and sharing your experience and just having like, a space where it was really okay to still be upset about it. yeah, was like a huge like kind of weight lifted off of like, okay, I can kind of move on. I mean, of course we're still like always processing something, but at least like there is something here where okay, we can keep going on, and the experiences that happen just now we like can find a place for it. Yeah, because it was tended to. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. And
Yeah.
I think that um, more people need this.
Yeah.
When you're doing it again, or if you're going to do it again.
Are we're like,
Yeah.
I think grief school is needs okay, next semester. Actually,
Yeah.
we're starting January 8th next semester. That's yeah.
And it's a
So
6-week program.
program.
How
Hmm.
many people were in it? How many?
This time I think there were 15 of us. Yeah.
That's a good size.
Good size. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Were you able to split people into like little groups, or were you always all together?
We were together, but we also had grief buddy pairing system. So in between classes, you could connect with, yeah, your grief buddy to check in with each other. And also, like during our sessions, we would also have like pair and share time. So it wasn't always a group sharing thing. Could have like more individual one-on-one
Nice.
missing
Yeah.
with each other. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting, because I mean, I just think how all these griefs are connected, like that when the pandemic happened, like, yes, like babies and small children were absolutely affected, but like, you know, people who have been around, for a while and seen other kinds of catastrophes were also impacted because it triggered them. It triggered them from like the war that they had survived in like, the 70s or whatever it was, like got triggered like really intensely in people.
hmm. Oh, and we had a guest speaker come in one of our sessions. She's someone who works for the school district of Hemet, in the I think junior high school, and she was sharing with us just what she's been seeing with all the kids in school, where there's just this huge spike in like drug use and drug selling, and there's all this like, I mean, coming back after the pandemic to schools was just a very it wasn't well done to like integrate back. And I think it was just really good for her to share because it was an example of like a microcosm of everything everyone was feeling too, where like we didn't have space to process the grief of everything that happened. And we can't just expect to just go back to business as normal or as usual. And all these kids were just completely like so many of them feeling anxious, depressed. Their main coping mechanism that's available to them is drugs for more, just to more like repress what's going on. And suddenly they're faced with, coming back to school and like not feeling ready, all this pressure now with like exams and social anxiety.
I think,
And
it highlights the challenge with both of these systems in a way. Like the system that we created during the pandemic that had this, intense kind of like fear mongering, lots of isolation, and
yeah,
then in juxtaposition to like the pressure of a, educational institution.
yeah,
Like I can see how in some ways there would be some kids who, while they may be like starved for their social interaction, like actually appreciated the space that was outside of those rigorous like deadlines and things like this that children face. Like there was this simultaneous like, bit of freedom at the
yeah,
same time with isolation during the pandemic, and then stepping back into the structure with all this pressure, and the saving grace being that you got to see your friends. You know what I
right,
mean?
right,
Is a
yeah,
really strange dynamic that kind of highlights like the things that maybe aren't as, I don't know, functional about our like institutions of learning,
yeah,
when it comes to like what children actually need,
yeah.
right?
I mean, it was just a microcosm kind of like the way that our culture and society in general deals with trauma or like crisis, which is okay, this happened. Okay, let's just brush it under the rug and keep, like not having any, again, like no space for safety to process what happened.
I think it's amazing that
Yeah.
she drew a correlation between that experience and the increase in drug use, because I think
Yeah.
some people wouldn't have
Mhm.
necessarily noticed that there
Right.
was a
Yeah.
relationship between that. And that's so important because we get to see that there was an actual event that occurred, and it's not just these bad kids or something like that.
Exactly. But the thing is that now with the rise of drug use, she's saying that now the teachers and the principals, and now there's this, again, this like war happening between the faculty and the students. So now, like the demonization of drug use and saying, oh, look at all these problem kids. Now, when you have even more problem kids and just kind of lumping them into, oh, look at these kids who just won't behave.
Yeah.
And it's this issue of you are not looking at the root cause of why are these kids so out of it.
Right. Why are they trying to escape? Why are they trying to get
Uh,
away from their experience?
yeah, and it's again like making the connection with its unprocessed grief. And I think that goes for so many people right now who are experiencing, burnout, just like so exhausted, like yeah, in this place, and then we're like, oh my God, I'm not doing well in this world. What's wrong with me? And it's like, no, it's because you're behaving exactly the way that you should be after having gone through this like whole deep traumatic experience, and we need to give ourselves that space and grace to acknowledge that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just the words that you just said just now are so incredibly comforting when someone is facing like a part of themselves that they don't understand, to just
Mhm.
be able to go, oh, in the context of what happened to me, this makes perfect sense. I'm exactly in the state that I'm meant to be in because of what came before this,
Mhm.
and we don't often like see that thread,
Mhm.
while we're in it.
Mhm.
Sometimes, I mean, that's the blessing, is when we have a facilitator, someone like you, who can be with us in our process and allow us to really see into how you're reacting makes perfect sense. Like,
Mhm.
in a way, like your anger, your grief, your frustration, your,
Mhm.
fear is totally justified given the experience that you've gone through. Because
Mhm.
I think that we try to make ourselves wrong a lot. We
Yeah.
try to deny our experience by making ourselves like, this doesn't make sense. I shouldn't be feeling this way,
Mhm.
right? How do I change this? How do I shift how I feel to be more pleasant or more palatable to either myself or to others,
More
right?
productive. Yeah.
More productive. Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing with, again, like when you're in your own bubble, isolated and disconnected, it's even easier to just keep self flagellating about that. But then when you connect with others and see, oh no, it's not just me, this is a collective issue. I'm part of this greater grief uprising right now of like all the unprocessed grief of all the ages that's just, coming up. And how, yeah. So like with that there's more empathy and compassion, like, oh, it's not just, I'm not just the only one dealing with this, having this problem.
Yes, that can be so, so comforting to see that other people, I think about that with, with my work, a lot of it's about muscular pain and stress that people hold in their muscles, right? And it's surprising to me, you know, before I started this work, I would look around and see, these like beautiful, fit people who just seem to have everything. And I would just imagine that, while I was living in chronic pain, that their bodies were perfect and they had no issues. And now that I'm actually a facilitator of this work, the number of beautiful, perfect looking people that I interact with who are living with physical pain in their bodies or emotional agony, like, it is not something we can see from the outside, you
Mhm.
know? And you may see someone who looks like, I don't know, maybe you consider them to have bad posture or something like that. And they could actually not be experiencing any pain in their body. But
Mhm.
somebody else who's sitting perfectly upright could be like, my back is killing me. Like, we don't know how to see that from the outside, and we can't compare our experience to others because we're all suffering differently, and we're all suffering just differently, and we can't imagine that someone else like isn't, hasn't experienced some kind of suffering and has it together or has it perfect. It's just not true.
And that's just the next, yeah, the thing about self-flagellation is you're comparing yourself with someone just looking at the surface. Yeah.
Mm.
Ugh. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, this grief school sounds like a really powerful thing that the world needs. I'm very excited about it. January 8th, you said?
Let me, yeah, I believe that's if that's a Monday. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's coming
Yeah.
up.
Coming up again, in about a couple months. And yeah, we just thought, okay, I think grief isn't going away. We're There's so much more to explore and offer spaces for this.
And
So
during the grief school, is your emphasis on the pandemic, or can someone come in with their own particular grief about
yeah, I have
something
a feeling, yeah, we're just gonna open it up to it's not just
else?
pandemic. And even throughout our course, it turned out like, yes, there were pandemic initially flavors of it, but it just became like, no, like grief is grief with the things that's happening today, the thing that happened 20 years ago, like all grief is welcome.
I
So
love it.
yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Well, if someone wants to learn more about this or reach out to you, or maybe they're listening to this and January 8th has already passed, but they want to
Yeah.
find out like when the next one is, like where would they find you?
So you can find me well, my website is Kwonyin.global, KWONYIN.global. And you can follow me on Instagram at Kwonyin. You can subscribe to my newsletter. That's a good way to kind of get introduced to some of the channelings. I'm actually starting a membership program starting this next month called Pearl, which stands for Powerful Emotional Alchemy Receiving Love. I'm just obsessed with pearls because of its symbolism with the irritant, creating, yeah, the emotional irritant creating this beautiful iridescent pearl. And in that membership, I will be offering emotional alchemy, shadow guidance, meditations, journeys each month live. So that's a good way to, yeah, get introduced and dive deeper into the work. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
And tell us a little bit, I mean, we're kind of closing in on our time here, but tell us a little bit about your vocal work.
Yes. So the vocal alchemy is, let's see it as um, like I'm tuning in to, I mean, in each moment, it's just kind of tuning into what is the energy of what I'm sensing in the group field, including myself. Um, and I am kind of allowing the sounds of whatever the emotions I'm tuning into to be translated into, yeah, the emotions translated into sound that I am kind of performing this cathartic activation. Yeah. And so I just actually, on 11/11 in Joshua Tree, I just had a vocal activation, alchemy performance there where, yeah, I was really, I never know what's going to come up. It's just kind of tuning into what the energy is. But I felt a lot of kind of grief sounds, wailing, um, coming through. And yeah, it's a healing experience where it's like making kind of audible and visible the unseen, the frequencies, and kind of offering my body as a channel, as a vessel to kind of transmute them through the expression. And so it's like a collective healing experience.
That's incredible. I mean, I feel like that touches on like the essence of what's possible in art, which is to express the ineffable, to move that collective, experience into something, to channel it into something that can be like heard or felt or
Yes.
seen, right? And yeah, that's such a gift to like everyone to be able, I'm thinking about like different kind of shamanic experiences that I've had where, there's these sounds, maybe in a shamanic sound bath or things like this, where you hear this sound and it sounds maybe for a moment like laughter, and then it sounds like crying, and then there's a part of you that cries with that crying. Just like for a split second there was a part of you that laughed with that laughter, and it helps just like move out the things that are getting caught in our in our emotional and subtle body.
Yes. And I feel that through sound and music, there's something there that I think can bypass our kind of mental thinking space, where it just enters, it's a more like immediate kind of primal experience of that emotion. So I feel like it's a really kind of powerful way to transform, yeah, these energies and stuck energies, stuck emotions that are within us. Yeah. Yeah. Through the vocalization of it. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, that's so exciting. I look forward to attending one of your future performances.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's been such an amazing conversation. I'm so glad that you came on today and shared this. I think it's really needed, much, much needed in the world right now, especially around grief. It will continue to be needed with the things that people are facing right now. And yeah, do you have any last words for our audience about this process, about this experience?
Well, I would say maybe something on compassion about like wherever you are in your relationship with your shadow emotions, like um, to, yeah, um, really give yourself, I invite you to give yourself the space to not avoid, and to like create a gentle space for you to allow, allow, and know that, um, yeah, in the receiving of yourself, you are, you literally are transforming that hell place of like I can't to I can, um, like, and we need to be able to create that paradise first in our bodies, in the allowingness of the darkness.
Yeah, the acceptance and taking it in and letting it be inside of us. Yeah. And that's a wonderful thing to end with here, the compassion of like letting that process to take place. Because I think it is a natural process, just like the processes in our bodies that want to follow through to some kind of completion. And when we get in the way, that doesn't happen. That's that stuckness that we've been talking about. And so the compassion that allows for that process to be led by our physical body, by our soma, by our consciousness and intelligence. Like, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Such an honor to be here and share my story, and yeah, be in this conversation with you. Such medicine for me to connect with you.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to chatting with you again soon. And if anyone's curious about your offerings, check the show notes, follow her on Instagram, and just learn more about this incredible process of transmutation of shadow and the really unique way that you're bringing this into the world, Kwonyin. Your specific frequency around this, I think, is really beautiful and nourishing on such a different level.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Free Your Soma podcast. To find out more information about today's guest, check the show notes. And to find out more information about me, Amy Takaya, and the Radiance program, visit www.freeyoursoma.com.